And we're live, everybody. So thank you for being with me today, gentlemen. We're going to do a quick rundown while we wait for Sandy to who had great access to the factory to give us all of the core deep dive insights on how it is that Tesla is manufacturing the Cybertruck. We obviously know there's a lot of revolutionary new technology here. And for those of us who are huge nerds, we want to know how this thing is made. And so today we have the great privilege, thanks to Joe Tegtmeyer. He had an excellent video of the Cybertruck manufacturing line. Of course, with all of his drone videos, he knows the whole layout of the building very well. You kind of get a good insight into how this line is laid out physically, and then he kind of waited around until the crowd had mostly cleared out, and so got great shots on the way out of the entire general assembly line. And so we're looking forward to watching this video, kind of reacting as we go along. And obviously we have Scott, who is an expert in factory automation. That's what he does. And then Dr. Know-It-All is with me here as well, and my Tesla weekend. So thanks for being with me. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started.
Hey everybody, it's Joe. Thank you for watching part 2 of my detailed tour of the Cybertruck General Assembly line during the Cybertruck delivery event on the 30th of November. Now, we get a chance to see Giga Texas often in images like this from my drone, and we can tell a lot of information, but this time we get to go inside and see quite a bit of the work that has been done and the current
Thanks, he was talking really fast there.
General Assembly lines within Giga Texas. So we'll start with this highlighted section of the main factory. This is where the bulk of the Cybertruck delivery event activities took place, also where we've been seeing all of the process with setting up the general assembly lines 2 and 3 within Giga Texas. For this tour, it's important to remember that Giga Texas is arranged in a grid coordinate system. We'll be using this throughout the video. Now, this runs from the north to the south, grid lines 1 through 84 currently, and from the west to the east, Alpha or A through Z, sometimes Z1. The bottom right-hand corner is where all of the activities for the Cybertruck delivery event took place. You can also see that highlighted area with the stars. This is where we will tour through the general assembly lines for the Cybertruck on the ground floor. To help put all this back into context, this is that highlighted section of Giga Texas, the southwest corner, and the inset section of the grid coordinate system that we will be using. To help put into perspective what we saw and how much grid coordinate H83 is that column you see on the left-hand side of the screen. And the purple area with the yellow star is where all of the crowd was for that event. Now, one of the things that came to mind with this location for the end of line
by the way, if you want to stop there, Hans,
as you can see by this recent video.
Sorry, figure we might as well jump in at some point. So first of all, that really is helpful because, you know, it's very easy to get lost in there. And I knew we were in like one corner, but I actually didn't know which corner exactly it was. So super helpful of Joe to specify all that. Also, that area, the purple area that we all were in, was very small. So it was not that big, you know, for the number of people that were in there. So just an FYI.
That purple area, but also the area that you toured is just one aspect of it. All the really good stuff you didn't see. And hopefully Sandy is seeing all that stuff to the side. It's right. The tributaries that I think are way more interesting than the main line.
Right, exactly.
For sure.
We basically saw final assembly. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
When I went to the shareholder meeting, the only time I've ever been inside a Tesla factory, we went into the room where the final touches are put on, and it is a truly massive space. And you fail to realize this is less than half the width of the building, a tiny little section of it, which is easier to understand. And it's only the first floor. This, 40-foot ceiling is the first floor alone.
And remember, when you say half the width, you're also ignoring the fact that there's a length. So if it was half the width and half the length, you're only talking about a quarter of the area. And I think we were like about an eighth of the length if we were lucky. So that's like a tiny portion we saw. And there was so much good stuff in the back that they're kind of keeping away from our prying eyes.
And it was still probably close to a half a mile walk. I mean, it was maybe 4/10 of, it was a very long walk. And that was something that when Scott and I went through my footage, which is not, I'm sure, as good as Joe's, it was like, oh yeah, there's stuff happening on the floor above at the same time, which helped explain the flow of the factory thing. So, Joe gets into that as well. But anyways, it's just very amazing to think how freaking large this thing is.
Yeah, it's truly gigantic. I took a friend of mine there on Saturday and drove him past it. And what he said is, it's too large to comprehend. And I would say that it's much like how when you see a starship in person, even just the booster defies human understanding because the scale just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's so big, you literally need to get on a toll road to drive the length of it.
Yeah. I remember the first time it was still, it was starting to be framed in. So it was 2021, I guess. Anyway, I believe that's correct. But we were driving up from Boca Chica from Starbase, actually. And we were driving along the toll road and we were like, where is the factory? It's around here somewhere. There wasn't a Google map, like little dot for it yet. And all of a sudden I look up and I'm like, holy crap, that's gotta be it. Cause it just kept going and going and going. So yeah, it's
yeah.
Really,
and isn't it measured in pentagons? How many pentagons is it? Is it like 5 pentagons
or hamsters, some crazy... one or the other?
Yeah.
I think Elon said 3 pentagons.
3 pentagons. And of course, most of us, we really have the pentagon as a reference of size in our head, so we don't even know how big the pentagon is. We know it's pretty big. And now this thing is 3 times that. And I guess they got to get 5 times bigger because, 5 pentagons would be perfect.
It's something like 40 Walmarts.
Wow. Super centers.
Wow.
Super Walmarts.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow. That really puts it in perspective. Yeah. So go into a Walmart, walk the perimeter of the Walmart Supercenter, and then multiply that by 40. And
do that 40 times.
Yeah. That'd be how long it would take you to walk through this entire thing.
It would take you 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah.
40 Walmart days and 40 Walmart nights. All right. Cool. So I guess we can get into the meat of it now. So there we go.
Clip. The exit point for the Cybertrucks is on the south side of the building.
Scrub through
see
this
the arrow.
we can get to...
number of signs. The general assembly line actually runs from the north to the south.
Yeah, and for those who want to, I highly recommend anyone actually go and watch this full video by Joe. We'll kind of scrub through it a little bit. But he goes through in detail how to know where he created this whole map, and he knows where everything is based on the signage that's on the posts and then the signage that is up above overhead as we go through.
But we'll be going in reverse order. Also, I thought you might find this interesting on the outside of the building in the same general location in A79. You can see that with the inset map in the bottom right. This is what it looks like. It's also where those temporary platforms have been located. A lot of equipment's been loaded up. On the section that I have the arrow with the circle, this is where the robotic assembly of the Cybertruck doors takes place. They bond the stamped inner structure to the stainless steel outer shell. And all of this is done with the robots. You can see the yellow robots in this section. Along the entire 3rd floor, there's a lot of this type of assembly and production for the Cybertruck that takes place. So pretty cool to see that it's a multi-level vertical production process that they have. And we're going to see a lot of that throughout the rest of the tour.
Yeah, just pause for a second, because I think a few months ago, he caught on his drone footage some robot cells being delivered. Everyone wanted to know what they were. And it kind of looked like they were something to do with some kind of either laser welding or laser cutting cells, just because the way the enclosures were set up. And I suspect that what was seen out in the parking lot is probably what's up there. And the thing about it, whenever you have a laser cell, it has to really be sealed, because you're playing around with things that could easily blind someone. And that's how they were kind of configured. And the question is whether they were like a cutting cell or a laser cell. Either way, you need a certain amount of power to be able to do that. And there is some suspicion that there may be some laser welding going on when they are bonding the panels onto the backsides. We know there's adhesives. We suspect there might be some welds, but we're not sure. And we clearly know they're cutting. They got to be cutting, because when you look at the Cybertruck, those edges are perfect. So it's like, okay, how do you get it so perfect?
And I'll throw in the it wasn't evident from the factory tour part, at least, but there were some displays out in the lobby before we walked in, and those displays had the stainless panel. It was a door specifically. It had the stainless panel on an aluminum backing. And Scott and I, we looked at it. There were places that looked like it could have been some sort of laser welding, but it's got to be done very carefully, because obviously the heat of the weld can't pass through to the exterior of the stainless, or else you get discoloration, deformation, all sorts of stuff. So if it's being done, it's being done very precisely, which I guess is exactly what laser welds are good for. Robots are good at that kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and they definitely hid it away from the tour. That's not something that we actually get to see what it is. And then one of the other factors that they really think about, with laser, is that not only is it bright, but usually during the cutting process or an etching process, whatever you're using it for, it can produce toxic gases depending on what is being burned. And so humans can't just sit there and breathe whatever that is in the cell. So that's environmental factors are also something that really goes into those laser
I think
cells.
We could see when the cells were out there, it looked like there's something set up for venting as well. So yeah, they definitely have to pull it out.
And worth noting that the adhesive is a critical component, because you don't want to rub stainless against aluminum. It can create galvanic corrosion. It's one of the few things. It's why your iPhone watch has to be the correct kind of band. You can't just interchange aluminum and stainless willy-nilly, or you'll have a bad time.
Yeah, and that's going to be an issue, that if you decide that you want to use this as an amphibious vehicle, especially in salt water, you're going to get a lot of galvanic corrosion there. So it means they're going to have to think of having some sort of sacrificial anode somewhere in there, which all boats have. They get something like in there, so you put in, I think either they call it the zincs. You put that in there, and that is the one that will corrode the most. And so it kind of all goes over there. So I wonder if they're considering something like putting little things in there, or some sort of add-on that you would do to try to reduce it. But yeah, that's my worry. I've got some stunts I want to do in salt water, but then I'm like,
it's a pretty expensive toy. Yeah, it's an expensive little toy there.
And when they said it's like IP67, I'm like, oh, that's 30 minutes in the water. Okay, maybe not.
Do we actually know that those inner pieces are aluminum? I expected them to actually be some form of steel or stainless steel for exactly that reason.
They look like they're molded, or stamped.
Oh, they're stamped. They look stamped.
Yeah,
and the thing is, they're black in color. So Brian, could that be like a black aluminum, or anodized, or treated?
No, the occupant home is stamped steel, but the castings are still aluminum, and the body bonds to both of those.
At some point, steel is going to be needing. Yeah. So you may as well. I mean, the thing is, decide where you'd prefer to have that galvanic corrosion. That's about it. You're going to have it. Just decide where.
Engineering. It's all about the trade-offs. That's pretty much it.
Section, we're turning towards the north. We are at F81 going to F80. You'll see those on the columns in the upper left here on the left-hand side of the screen. And this is the section of the line where the trucks are nearly completed, and they're in final preparation, final assembly before they go over to the end of line section, which is located 2 grid coordinates to the right. On the right-hand side, we can see these platforms. They have these accordion lifting capabilities. They hold CyberTrucks, and they move along these platforms as part of the assembly process.
Here, look this way. You'll be on the video. At least it won't be a lot of sound, but you'll see it in there when I cut you in there.
Interestingly enough, maybe I just didn't record
using
this
these
part,
devices.
I don't recall this accordion lift part. But anyway, it's possible I missed it at the beginning of the tour. I was terrified that they were going to tell me I was breaking the law somehow with videoing, so I was being a little subtle. But anyway, it's very cool to see. Yes.
Worth noting, in this part of the factory, you can see the roof is only 15-ish, maybe 20 feet. This side of the factory over towards the windows, there's a mezzanine, and then the 3rd floor, and then in parts of it, there's another mezzanine above that. So you've got between 3 and 4 floors of machine that's pre-building the machine, as it were. All the assemblies are going together upstairs somewhere to get you to this point.
And Brian, can you Scott and I were speculating that because they're in parallel on the opposite side over here, they're building out the motors and the shock towers and the front assembly, back assembly. Our thought was that basically those were coming down this direction, and then they were being mated on the second floor that was going backwards, and then the elevator that we saw at the very beginning of the tour was dropping the thing down for final assembly, which is what we're seeing here. We're not sure. We were just guessing that, but does that seem reasonable?
That seems entirely reasonable.
Okay.
Tom Jew does not like vertical assembly, but it's unavoidable because, as one of the comments I got said, as big as it is, Elon works to save inches. And that's absolute. You know, if you can trim just $50 off, if you're making $1 million over 10 years, that's $500 million.
Yeah.
Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Right.
It's unfortunate I didn't get to see the factory itself, but
yeah.
I do have a pretty good idea of.
Yeah,
of
there's a reason they
there.
kept you and me out of there. Yeah. Now, I think just the analogy for everyone to understand what Brian was talking about, the preparations going on, that's like, cook prep. Basically, it's all these people off the sides that are getting the vegetables ready and dicing them and everything else. And then they finally kind of come to the main line where now they can start making your burrito and everything else. So that's the important stuff. Without it, you can't make the final assembly.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess the chef analogy that you're plating it up right here. It's like, it looks beautiful, but it's all the pieces that have to come in. Those are the parts that matter. So yeah.
Of the CyberTrucks are done automatically and robotically. So that really frees up people from having to be in an area where it could be kind of dangerous for them or difficult for operations. As a good view of this CyberTruck in this location, as you can tell, we are in coordinate F73, and we're working our way north along General Assembly Line 2.
And I just wanted to note for a second how thin that structural battery pack is there at the bottom. Like, there's very little in between the bottom floor that, people's feet are on top of, and then the bottom of the Cybertruck.
And if you
of
look
course,
at the Hummer, it's almost a foot thick. On the Hummer, it's like 10 inches, 11 inches. It's absurd. Go ahead.
Because it's a double stack, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And isn't that the thought that if you wanted a 500-mile Cybertruck, you would have to probably do a double stack also? Yeah.
Well, that's probably why they have the range extender. But I was going to say, like, the battery pack, they had a display unit out with the seats attached, and it's the same thickness as far as I could tell to the Model Y. I wasn't sitting there looking at both of them, but with the larger size, the thinness of the structural battery pack is much more evident with something that big versus the Y. It seemed like it was, relatively speaking, thicker because the 4680s or however tall they are, and so one level of them, but it's the same height for a much bigger, stack of batteries. So it was very impressively thin.
They're 10 millimeters taller than the 2170s.
Yeah. But what I was saying was, the structural battery pack in the Model Y seemed somewhat reasonable when you looked at how wide it was, and because it's 80 kilowatt hours more or less. So, and then this thing is a substantially larger at 123, and it just was crazy looking how thin it was, and the fact that it was supporting the vehicle. It's the structural battery pack. It's impressive.
All right, we'll keep going here.
Now, one of the things that I did notice, off into the distance, you'll see some red lights in a darkened section. Those are other parts of the assembly line that's either not for public viewing, or they're continuing to build out more of the production capacity in that area. Over on this side, we can see various stations to build.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to ask Brian to look at. That's what that is.
So,
well, I'm pretty sure that's a haunted lagoon. Oh, that's Pirates of the Caribbean, I'm thinking of. Never mind.
It's a small world after all.
No naked
now
man,
I won't get that out of my head. Thanks, John. The whole day. That earworm.
So we need. All we needed was a streaker in this thing, and it would have been perfect. Would have been great. Sorry, Hans, what were you going to ask?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, it looks like the Cybertrucks on the right side and the Cybertrucks on the left-hand side appear to be in roughly the same state of completion. Did you notice any difference in the two different sides at this point? It's odd to me that they look so similar when they're obviously not flowing from one side to the other right here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused about this because Joe's video shows something that I don't recall seeing, which is this whole side with the accordions and all that stuff. I don't know if maybe there were just so many people that it was sort of hidden, but it's very odd. I don't know if he was looking at it. Maybe he got access to a slightly different part of the line, but I was looking at the one kind of to the right, which is behind the cage. Yeah, you can. Let's see,
but that's kind of normal
Yeah,
to
this
have that
part,
on any
this part.
production line,
Yeah.
that you would have those accordions to be able to lift it up to different
Right.
levels, depending.
Yeah, no,
It's
I'm
there
just
for a
saying it
couple
was just
reasons.
odd
It depending
that I
upon what
didn't
you're
see it.
working on, and it also depends upon the ergonomics of the worker. So they
Right.
can be slightly adjusted depending upon whether you're a 5th percentile or 95th percentile individual.
Right.
So that's part of the reason. Now, if I was also looking at some of these things and wondering if they're all at the same state of assembly, and it really is the assembly line, why would that be the case? And it's because the takt time for whatever it is they're doing, let's say, doesn't meet the takt time of the line. So you're going to start doing parallelism in there instead and say, let's bring them over. And if this is a 5-minute process, then we have a 5-minute process and we have 5 of them. Starting to feel a little bit unboxing-ish to me.
Yeah. Well, and then, but it's also interesting because there is a difference in that on the right, or Joe's right side, which would have been the left side going in, they are moving backwards, but front to back. And then here, they're sideways. And so they are oriented differently. And I would expect that there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would too. Every model we've seen since the Giga castings came out has been one more step toward unboxing. The big front and rear castings were the first step to enabling that. When Berlin had their Giga Fest, we got to see the first seats mounted onto a structural battery. And with CyberTruck, we're seeing more steps in that direction, including the 48-volt architecture, which is critical to getting, if you're trying to unbox, the problem you run into is the wiring harness can't be unboxed. Well, with 48-volt, you can. And the hydraulic lines for your brakes can't be unboxed. Well, let's get rid of hydraulic brakes and just go to brake-by-wire. Now you can do it. You've finally got all the pieces together. Because unboxed is not a new idea. It's just an idea that wasn't possible before because of all the various technical limitations. And there were a bunch.
And the other thing to point out is with the orientation, when it's going sort of front to back or back to front, however you want to look at it, it's because all the operations you have to do are on the side. So you need to expose that part of the vehicle to work on it. And the problem with that, because the vehicle's so long, your line gets really long. But now if you're working on stuff that's basically front and the back, you don't want to do it that way. First, it's hard to get access to. And now you turn around 90 degrees and now you can push them more in. So that means more Cybertrucks in a shorter length line, taking up less space. So again, if you're trying to squeeze out the inches, and I don't care how big Giga Texas is, you still want to squeeze as much out, and you don't. And I have a feeling they're telling them to look, ignore the fact that it's really big. We have to make this compact. We don't want to run into what I always call Boyle's law of computing, is that the software always expands to meet the size of the RAM, which means you become inefficient and bloated. So a lot of your things can be very efficient, but it's just like, heck, I've got all the space. I'll do what I want with it. No. They get plans for that space. And it's not to be sucked up by Cybertruck production. They're going to be producing a lot of other things. So anything you can do to make it compact, the better.
Yeah, so I guess that would kind of indicate maybe on the left-hand side there that they were doing something with the tailgate or, something of that nature since it was pointed in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I would suspect.
Front of the production line. This is a good view of the Cybertruck body without the fender liners and the fender installation on the sides. It also gives you a good idea what the stainless steel looks like without all of those plastic parts installed. On this side, we can see that the truck bed liner has been installed by this point of the line. You can see many of those raised platforms that can move, and that's for the Cybertrucks to continue to process through this particular line. And a good view on the left-hand side of the number of stations that will be used for the assembly. In fact, on both sides, this really gives you an idea of the capacity that they will have for the Cybertruck.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm starting to realize, I think, what's going on here, and that is that we must have exited in a slightly different pattern than we entered, because this is all different. And I'm kind of like, I'm still a little bit mystified by this, because, and I remember that woman, she was super, super happy. So I must have been there, but just not processing the fact that this wasn't the same thing we were walking back out of, because I believe that actually the way in was actually one sort of alleyway over to the left, maybe, or something like that, because it just, this is not the same sequence of events that was there in the part that we were walking in. So if you watch the one Scott and I did, you can see all of the components of the front and back end coming together as I'm walking in. That was on my left, and the CyberTruck sort of final assembly was on the right. And this is definitely not the same sequence as what I was seeing. So very interesting. So I it's one of those things where it's just such a gigantic entity that it's quite possible that we just walked out a different way than we walked in, and I didn't really notice that because I was talking to people. So yeah. Anyway,
well,
they're
so
just trying to
Joe went
confuse
in
you.
late.
Did they spin you around a bunch of times?
Yeah, I
and
know.
put you
That's
back
what
the
I
other
kind
way?
of
And it's
thought.
like, okay, now we go. Yeah,
They sent us through that weird tunnel with all the lights on it. So, maybe they just like tripped us out.
oh, wait a minute. That's
Yeah,
the Men in
that's
Black tunnel that like make
Men
sure
in
you
Black,
forget everything.
No, so
Exactly.
Joe wanted to go in early, but didn't have time. And then when the live stream ended, they said, okay, get out. And he said, I haven't walked the line yet. So he walked as quickly as he could. And you'll notice, yeah, no one was there because it was late and everyone was leaving. And he was one of
Right.
the last people through. So
Right.
it's possible that he went a different direction, but it's also possible that it looked very different without all the people and distractions.
Yeah, but I mean, it's definitely different, because all of the
Okay.
CyberTrucks that I saw in final assembly were behind a cage. They were there was robots that were doing things. So I mean, unless it was one of those things where they suddenly pulled up all the props and we're like, oh, okay, now we're back to reality or something. And maybe they did that. I have no idea. Maybe there was just some prop stuff there, but it
I
looked
think there were a lot of
distinctly
props and demo modes and everything else.
Yeah. And then they had like motors and stuff stuck out in the front. But yeah, it's very oddly different than it was when I was walking in and out of there. So anyway, Joe got the special tour apparently.
As we turn towards this direction, another great shot of a partially assembled Cybertruck. The charging port has been installed. You can see most of the interior, none of the doors. And this image gives you a really good idea of how that passenger cabin that's stamped is looking at this stage of production. We're at grid coordinate F73, and the interior map shows you a pretty good idea of where this image has been taken. A common question people have is, what is the production rate at Giga Texas? And I don't know, but Sandy Monroe was just recently quoted as saying he believes it's at 60 units per hour. And we'll be able to find out very soon with the drone flights if that is accurate out at the outbound lot. I do hope it is. Now, as we get over here, we can see some of these stainless steel sail panels that go on top of the windows. And this image gives you a good view as well. Also, we can get a good sense of where we are located in the factory. We are at coordinate F72. Now, what we'll see with most of these stainless steel outer shell panels is that they are affixed using a variety of methods. A lot of them are adhesives and also with a understructure that is bonded to the stainless steel. And we'll see that later in the video. Now, getting back to what Sandy Monroe said is, if they are at a rate of 60 per hour, that should be pretty noticeable via the drone flights in the very near future. I also understand that the day after the Cybertruck delivery event, the production line was ramping up much farther and faster than it has been. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that in the near future. This is the sub-assemblies for the rear bumper of the Cybertruck. This gives you a really good view of what these look like without the plastic bumper cover on top. And it looks like it's pretty robust and definitely capable of holding that 11,000 pound towing capacity that has been advertised. Now, as we continue to move through the processing line, I noticed this on the left-hand side of the screen. This is that molded plastic bed for the Cybertruck. This is a good view of how it looks like. Now, the interesting thing is this bed is installed directly onto the castings, and there's really no other structure underneath it. So the purpose of that bedliner is just to hold cargo. It does not provide any structural strength to the vehicle, at least from what I could tell. Now, this is the line for the wheels. This gives you a good idea of how they are maneuvered throughout this particular location. As we look underneath, we see those platforms again that move the bodies. Looks like there's some robotic.
And so that's the mezzanine that you were talking about earlier, correct?
Yes, that what you just saw right there up above is, yeah, it's all the equipment and all the pieces and all the supplies that go up in this part of it, I assume a human-free kind of zone. There may be access points, but a lot of it is not for, it's just for robots. Yeah.
Location. As we look underneath, we see those platforms again that move the bodies. Looks like there's some robotic machines that do the torquing of the lug nuts. You can see that machine hanging down with the yellow pieces.
Actually,
on the
Hans, can you
end.
go back just a little bit?
This is amazing. The
I'm
amount
wondering
of
if at the end of this, go back. There was actually a display. Play forward without the sound for a second. But there was a monitor that actually looked to be active because they had all the monitors. They were just showing a CyberTruck picture on them. So you couldn't, the interesting part to me, I was like, show me what the displays are showing and how we know how things are going, but they were all turned off. But I think as we pass by the end of this thing where that post is, and he kind of turns around, I believe one of the monitors is actually showing that monitor there.
Right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like there's actually something like reasonable. Now, it's not one of the main kind of like displays that they have. You can see in the background of it, like way back there, right about the center top of this frame, there's like just a picture with the Cybertruck light bar in the back, but that one up front actually looks like it. Okay, that's probably just not one of their main AI-based systems. It's a robotic system
that might just be the standard HMI for whatever the controller is I have there. The other thing is that John, didn't you have like a video of the robot in the demo mode picking up the tire and bringing it over?
I had it doing the side panels.
There was one I saw where there was a robot in demo mode that was just like picking up the tire, going over, pretend putting it on, then bringing the tire back over, going back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And
I saw that, but I don't think I captured that on video myself. Yeah. Anyway.
And that is being done here. We see another elevator lift system on the left and some more of the bodies on the movable platforms here for the Cybertrucks. You see several onto the right as well. They come down from the elevators onto this platform and then they are moved to the next particular location. I think the amount of automation here is far more than people had expected before this event. And here's another good shot of where the tires and wheels are attached to the vehicle. We can see we're on F68 for the grid coordinate and where that is located within the factory. Also, if we take a look on the outside at a very similar location at A69, this gives you a good view of what we would see from the outside. We're on top of these receiving doors and they are listed with W97, 98, 99. That means west and those locations. Also, the amount of equipment and materials on the second and third floor, all of which is related to Cybertruck production.
And right there, you got to see the upper levels above that we were just talking about.
Now, one thing you may notice is the Cybertrucks are facing to the north here. That's because as they come down on the left-hand side, they do a turnaround at some point, and then they continue the final assembly on this side of the line. So instead of just a straight line from the north to the south, the production line actually goes back and forth throughout this entire section. And the width of this is only about 2 grid coordinates wide, which is about maybe 100 feet or about 30 something meters wide from the left to the right, which is pretty incredible. Now, this is a good shot of the grid coordinate F66 and where we are located here within the factory with this diagram. This is also a great shot of some of the elevator systems that are used to move the Cybertruck bodies and the parts that are used during general assembly from the ground floor where we are at up through the second and to the third floor where other assembly of the Cybertruck takes place, particularly things like the doors, the hood, and other parts are done 2 stories above where we are sitting right now. Now, this is a really good view of this rotisserie item. And again, this is all robotics. This is a way of taking the Cybertruck bodies and then turning them 90 degrees to position them appropriately for the lift. And this image here gives you a good view of the grid coordinate system of where we are located right now. Now, as we continue to this intersection area, this is where the tour will take a turn 1 grid coordinate to the left. So instead of being on the F, we'll be on the E grid coordinate line. This is also where they had a display of many of the Cybertruck bodies. Again, this is a good idea of where we are located in the grid system, F64, and you can see that
now I have
that
a point of
shift
reference
over to the left.
So
we'll
FYI,
from
so yeah, so this was the problem. Remember, Scott, when I said we got totally rushed and had to run through the end of the whole thing? That was the whole part that we ran through. So that's the reason why it doesn't really jog in my memory. But it was sort of like the part that you and I went through was actually just the part from this demo before you make the little left jog to the end of the thing. So yeah, so we only covered like half of what the whole line was in what we were talking about. And that, of course, is not even the whole line. So yeah, okay. Now that makes a lot more sense all of a sudden. So, okay. It was just that they were like, go, 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 go fast so you can wait for 25 minutes for Elon. So yeah, anyway, okay.
It's cool here to see. I was just going to look at this, the cutout that they have. So this is why there's a place to have that under bed storage area. It's sitting right in there behind that rear motor in between the wings of that rear casting.
And of course that allows a drainage plug for the under trunk so you can have it as a cooler. And also I was noting that again with Scott that the Giga castings are way bigger than they are for the Y, but they also appear to be significantly simpler. They don't have as many weird protrusions and like things going on. So they're much more just kind of like, you can look at that. I mean, it's just kind of a U shape and it's fairly simple. There's not a huge, so, I mean, they've obviously tried to trade off and make this thing, they've got these wings and these pillars and stuff like that have a lot of structure that add rigidity and everything to it. But they've obviously tried to make this possible with something as large as it is. I'm sure it was very difficult to get it to cast properly as big as it is.
And look at the accessibility.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's really easy to get in there to get to whatever you have to do to get your job done.
Yeah. Building it is so easy because of that. And I noticed that with the Y as well, but it's just not as evident because it's so much.
This is obvious. Vehicle. I mean, this is obvious.
This is really obvious. Yeah.
You don't have to crane over or do anything else. You just walk right in and do whatever you need to get done.
And I just wanted to point out here that you can see where my cursor's at. This is a line of that structural adhesive. And I anticipate these are castings that are aluminum, just like we talked about earlier. And this is a stamping here that's probably made out of steel. And so that's going to be one of those interfaces between an aluminum and a steel part where they really want to keep them separate.
And interestingly, those additional castings, so not the Giga casting, but the other ones, have all been painted. Which may add another layer of corrosion resistance.
Right. Yeah. And it was very odd in there because some of the trucks were completely black underbodies. Some had a blend of the kind of bronzish looking thing and black. Some were almost all bronze. Some had some. I don't know. I don't know if they're experimenting with different coatings and just, just taking a guess as to what's going to work. Because it looked like there were lots of different iterations of it in the different vehicles.
Right. And now it looked like because some of them didn't have full coverage that they were probably sprayed because they were just spraying maybe the areas they wanted. Others were fully done. And I wonder, well, I don't know if they're dipped or not, because remember, this is not cosmetic. So the process that you do to put the coating on there can be done very differently and very efficiently. And because they're small pieces that you don't need a huge vat, you don't need a really big paint booth or anything like that. So it's a little bit easier, but still, I kind of wonder whether they are spraying or dipping or what process. Brian, do you have any idea what you think they might be doing?
I don't. All I know is the occupant home, the stamped cage that's in the cabin. There is a cutout at the north end of where the Cybertruck is done, where they cut it, where they go into the paint shop for that. But in terms of the other parts, I do not know.
Yeah, and the other thing you'll notice is that a lot of the assembly is, let's say, changed around from what you normally see in general assembly, because you've got to put the whole thing together. Then you got to go paint it. And now what they're doing is that they've got the motor's already in there before you put the side panels on there. You can't do that normally because it's going to be going into the paint shop, right? And so when it went upstairs, normally that's when it's like off to the paint shop, but then you need the final assembly where you're putting everything else in. So that means they can decide when things go in. When's the appropriate time for things to go in?
And also, Joe pointed out that the glass goes in much sooner on the Cybertruck than it does on any other vehicle we've seen manufactured.
So there's one of them where it goes in real early because it's needed structurally, right, John? That's what was pointed out.
Because the small triangular pieces was because the adhesive had to cure. So that was the part that we saw that they were sitting there and the bead was drawn and the person puts it on and then it goes for a long ways as it's curing. So yeah.
So again, that means your overall construction time drops down. Everyone's wondering, it takes us 30 hours, something like that. How is Tesla getting it under 10 hours, whatever? It's because a lot of these curing processes they can do early rather than later.
Right. It's a great shot there, by the way.
And also how they are attached to the stamped
Stop for a second.
For the
so you can see how it's kind of black in the bottom and then a different color up there. So it looks like they're only spraying it partially for some reason. So it's two-tone.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that could have to do with the adhesive too, because that top part is where the adhesive to that steel sort of like just kind of like, I don't know what you call it, but that sort of wing looking thing that goes across the outside, maybe, but it's still got to adhere to everything. I don't know. And some of them, like I said, were completely black. So I don't know. At this point, they just might be experimenting.
And part of it could be they're not coating the whole thing because they're assuming it's that part that's going to be exposed to water or anything else if it goes into boat mode. So they're like, the upper part, don't worry about that so much.
Yeah.
Well, and I assume that these are the early tests that they're putting on display because they have nothing better to do with them rather than ones that are pulled out of the line for display.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other possibility. That's not what it really looks like.
Yeah. The ones that were actually in the line, they tended to be, well, no, even the ones that were further down tended to have the bronze and the black mix, but the ones that were very early in the line that looked like they were like the more recent ones tended to be all black. So I'm wondering if they've just gone from a spraying method to just going like, crap, we're just going to dip it. Maybe they're just like, bloop, and the whole thing's done and we don't have to worry about it. So,
or it might be the other way around, because sometimes maybe the easy way to dip it is only dip it halfway and then pull it out rather than completely dunking it.
Yeah. But even this part, the bronze is not the natural color of this stuff. So unless I'm sorely mistaken about the type of aluminum they're using. But anyway,
it's got kind of aerospace vibes for the color that they're using there.
Yeah. That thing looks like a Batmobile there so much.
Parts that are bolted directly to the castings to make the structure necessary to put on the exterior panels. You can also see how the interior is installed because they do this on top of the structural battery, which makes the floor. So all of this assembly work of the seats, the center console, and some other ideas are just bolted outside of the car and then put in and affixed into the vehicle, creating the structure. And it's a good view.
And again, stop for a second, is that they have not put the panels on the outside yet. Okay. You get all the stuff in here. You're going to put the panels on the outside and then send it to the paint shop like this? No, you can't. That all has to wait. They're mixing up the order of operations to their preferred order, because it is so easy to get in there and get access to those seats without the doors or anything else in the way. So all the hard stuff, all the hard assembly is done in a state that you want it to be in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the idea of unboxed assembly, that's the beauty of it. And if you back up just a little bit, Hans, you can see like in the B pillar that there's like a little, like just one single, it looks like one single, maybe two or three Ethernet cable. Anyway, it's basically nothing compared with what you'd normally see in a vehicle. You just see like wires everywhere coming out of a spot like that. So you can see where that 48-volt architecture and going CAN over Ethernet at gigabit speed is a huge advance in terms of the amount of wiring required inside the vehicle. And it's a really, really big advance there. Oh, I think Hans has left us for a moment. There, but not there.
He's there. I see him.
Okay, there we go.
are just bolted outside of the car and then put in and affixed into the vehicle, creating the structure. And it's a good view of some of that on the floor, some of the bolts that are necessary to combine the structural pack to the front casting on the left, and also a good detail view of this stamped inner structure that forms the passenger compartment and is the section in between the two castings. This is a really good view of the rear casting. Now there's the casting itself, which is the part where you see the motor attached and some of the suspension. Then you can see those sails on either side, and those are attached to the castings as well. And this is what formed the bed of the truck. Now, earlier we mentioned that plastic liner. It just
So Brian, do you know, are those
and then
sails?
the stainless steel panels are
are those sails are also castings? They're just smaller castings. They're not these gigantic, because they don't look like they could be stamped. But that just looking at those,
to me,
they provide so much three-dimensional rigidity there that's a huge part of the truck, actually, the structure.
And this is one of the places, a lot of this complexity on the Model Y rear casting is integral to the actual rear casting, the Giga casting. Whereas these, all of that complexity is done in a smaller casting.
Right.
And, those top pieces right there on the sail, from the one side, they look like they're just stamped. But on this back side, the way that you see these little protrusions and stuff, that does not look like a stamping to me. So this actually looks like this is cast as well.
Yeah.
That's my
I think another interesting thing to ask Brian, what is usually the very last thing that's put on the car when it comes off the assembly line?
I don't know, the doors?
I think the tires. When did the tires like almost the very last thing?
Yeah, those are definitely very late in the line.
But they're actually going on fairly early in the process. Kind of in the middle of the process.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is a demo vehicle here.
But I think we also saw earlier on that where they were going on wasn't like at the very end. I think they were already on before they went up. And then whatever's going on up, remember, they're on wheels at that point. So if it's on wheels, that changes a lot of the way that you can now think about the mobility of the vehicle.
Interesting. And it was pointed out in my chat that one reason the robots are doing the wheels is because the wheels are probably too heavy to be done manually by a human.
Yeah, even with lift assist. You're going to need a lift assist to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in the Car Wow video, he actually mentioned that. He's like, well, they're having a robot do this here instead of a person, when a person would be faster. And then he picked it up. He was like, oh, that's why this is way too heavy. Especially if you're going to do, 100 of those in a few hours. Like, you can't just be sitting there doing that repetitive motion with something that heavy all day long.
Yeah. You're going to need a mechanism to lift it up, which will be a lift assist. And the cost of setting up those lift assists will almost be the same as doing it robotically. Otherwise, a guy's going to take the wheel. He's going to have to roll it on over there because it's really heavy, get it really close, and then jack it on up there and then try to zip, 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 zip. And again, you've got the nut drivers, which are designed to, and I think it's actually 6 nuts that you have in there, lug nuts. It's able to do 6 of them all at the same time.
And one thing about the wheel covers, the hubcaps, is they're a 2-layer system. There's a gasket and the outer layer, and they're rubberized. They're not... It's like a hard plastic rubber or whatever, so they're not going to be scrape magnets, which is really nice. Plus, the wheels are just really big, so you'd have to have a huge curb before it got above the tire part. But yeah, I was like, oh, I wish that they would back propagate that to like the other Teslas, because I hate the fact that every time you even look at a curb, it's like
rash.
it's like curb rash everywhere. So yeah. And the front assembly, obviously, is a little more complex than the rear in terms of like all the mechanics of it and stuff. But yeah, so.
But still very clean, very accessible, very easy to get in to get your job done.
Into the vehicle. It's actually pretty efficient because a lot of this stuff can be done without having to worry about the interior.
Well, and also just how shallow that front area is. So any of the assembly that's going on there, like they don't even have to walk into the vehicle very far with just the shape of the way the CyberTruck is put together. It's like all right there within arm's reach.
Yeah, and again, the I believe that even though this is a demo vehicle, that the the window, the top windshield and the two side ones, and I believe the very top, the sort of skylight version, all those are on there early. And again, I don't know under regular circumstances if you could do
They
that.
come
before you
late.
paint
They
the
can't
car.
go to the paint
Yeah,
shop like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
yeah,
yeah.
so
So that's
it's a
what I was
huge
thinking
advance.
was the last thing was all glass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think
And
actually
here they're
the
allowed to
last thing are the
cure it.
wheels, and then the
Right.
yeah,
So-
the glass, and then the wheels.
Imagine if it took like, I don't know, 30 to 40 minutes for it to get from the point where they put the glass on to the end of the line, and that it's curing all that time. And so it's done by the time you get done. But if you didn't do that, again, as the engineer told me in this thing, you'd have to like just wait. You just have to sit the car there and wait for like an extra 40 minutes after it was just done. So if you put the windows on last, because the adhesive wouldn't.
Yeah, you'd have
cured
to have
that.
a lot where you just parked them
Yeah,
and waited for them to
yeah.
cure if it needed to go on to the next step.
Right.
Mhm.
So an
Basically, you
interesting
create a
point-
very big, long intestine like that, where it just slowly is moving along there to try to cure. I mean, that's what it's like when it comes out of the paint shop.
Right.
Sure. So an interesting point I'm noticing on the windshield is the early prototype designs we saw, the windshield was asymmetrical and it had a different cutout for where the wiper would go. And a big question was, can this be a right-hand drive car? And one answer was no, it can't. They'd need a different windshield because it's asymmetrical. That windshield appears symmetrical to me. You could put the wiper on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, it's
Is that
not. You can
possible? I think
just
there's a cutout over
Is there a
yeah.
cutout there?
yep, right
Oh,
here.
way over at the side.
there is a-
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
But
But
okay.
But I mean, if they're going to do right-hand drive, since they've got the big question I wanted to look at, and it's a little unclear, but since you don't have that steering column that goes through the middle of the whole thing, moving it doesn't look like it'd be that big a deal. And of course, if they've pre-designed it to do that, it would be relatively easy. And of course, if you're cutting out that piece of the windshield, because I can't imagine they sort of cast it or whatever. What do you call it? It's not blowing glass, but whatever. When they make it, I'm sure they cut it out afterwards. So they probably could just do that on the reverse side. So I think that would be a relatively small detail to fix if they needed to.
I agree, and there appears to be plenty of space where the mechanism would go.
Right.
So, yeah,
right.
right there. So
Yeah.
I don't see it as a big obstacle, but
Yeah.
hey.
And who was it that said it? Was it Franz? Somebody they're making a lot of statements that seem to indicate that Australia, Malaysia, UK, places like that could get it relatively soon, that they'll be making right-hand drive versions of the vehicle. And again, that's why the steer-by-wire makes that all so much simpler. You don't have to deal with all this crazy crap.
I
inside
don't
the
know.
car.
It's going to be weird. The console is going to be in the middle, which
Yeah.
means we all have to be left-handed now. First, we'll be looking over
Well,
there. And then
I mean,
we'll
they
be
already
kinda-
have to be like
my,
that.
my hand-eye coordination will be completely messed up.
so don't try to drive one in Australia.
So we've got to move the console over to the right side. But which is interesting is when you actually get into what's called a right-hand drive, I thought it was mirrored, and to realize that actually all your controls and everything are actually the same. They just translate it on over. But now that you have a center console, it's a little bit different. So your stocks come over, everything is the same. It's just the wheel is not where you expect it to be.
Right.
Your controls are usually, but now you do have that little bit. So I wonder if they're going to mirror. Do they do that right now with the center console? Do they mirror it?
Oh, you're just
The
saying the
app?
controls. So like the
control. Yeah,
drive and
think
stuff
about
is-
it.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
So
Yeah.
whether it's the same or it's like, oh, mirror it. So what I'm used to getting is right here closer to this, and the stuff I don't need, I have to reach a little bit further.
Yeah, I would think they would almost have to, because a lot of the controls you need access to are relatively close to your hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't driven one I haven't even been in one in a right-hand drive country.
Have to ask someone out there.
Yeah,
In the
actually,
comments,
yeah.
tell us.
Comments, let us know.
Comments. Are they the same?
But see that unit, it looks like you could just sort of trade off the dash unit with a different one and take that, because that's all the steering unit is. It's just that little block right there. And so you just kind of make a new dash that has one on the other side and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was wondering, just getting a brief view earlier of where they bring the structural battery pack up and it has the front seats, are these rear seats actually pre-mounted? Because think about the amount of room that you have as the operator. If you install these rear seats from inside the vehicle without the structural floor pan there, it looks like they have fixed
Oh,
that
yeah.
moving. So you could do that before the structural battery came up. You'd have so much room inside there. You wouldn't have the floor. You wouldn't have anything else behind you. and you could do all that work. And then after that, you could bring up the floor pan with those front seats, and it would basically be a finished interior at that point.
You can easily access it from both sides. So before the motor's even back in there, even though the casting's in place, you can just walk right up to the back if you have to do anything there. Like you say, if the floor pan isn't there, you can just pop right up in there to do whatever you have to do. Again, I think they've broken it down to make sure everything is easy.
I've gotten 4 comments come in saying that it is mirrored. They found an image on Google.
Oh,
and yes, so the controls, the park and reverse are just moved to the right from the left, and yeah, everything is.
But they didn't mirror the text, huh? You don't have to be Da Vinci to be able to read it.
Unfortunate.
You have to have a mirror to look in the mirror to see.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll be the Christmas update this year, the holiday update. It'll be they'll mirror the
Da
text
Vinci
on the
mode.
right-hand drive. Da Vinci mode. Oh, by the way, when we rented our Model 3 in Texas last week, somebody had turned on Rainbow Road Forever. So every time I went into like just autopilot, it was just like Rainbow. I was like, where the hell is the control to turn this off? Because it was really annoying. But anyway, yeah. So fun times.
It's in the toy box.
Yeah, well, I know. I found it after a few minutes, but driving down the highway, it wasn't like I had a lot of mental capacity to look at that.
Right.
Anyway, it was just like, whoa, that's really loud. Anyway. So Hertz needs to do a better job of like wiping.
You see that structure?
Yeah. And I believe that it looks like maybe that there's a testing unit there. We couldn't tell, but there was something that had little lights that were blinking and stuff in there. So I don't know if that was like something that they were using to test it before they actually placed it into the vehicle, or whether that's part of
I
the
would
car
imagine,
itself.
yeah. If they can go through and do a really quick diagnostic to make sure everything is working.
Well, this
better
is
to
something
catch it there than later.
Right. This is something Joe Justice talks about all the time, of course, and other people too, but like that you're doing all the testing of the components so that you don't build the car and go like, oh, whoops, the structural battery pack didn't work.
Yeah.
Take the whole thing apart again. Well,
quality assurance should not be at the end. It should be during the process.
Right. So it's each little moment as you're going through.
Control pack. You see the seats, the console, some of the electronic equipment, some of the vents for the heating and ventilation system. All of this is done together. And then once their appropriate time for marrying this up with the body, that is done very close to this point of the 3, and the interior is done very quickly. So as I pan the camera to the left, we get a chance.
So I assume most of all this work is also done either on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and then they just bring these components down.
It does seem that way.
To see more of the assembly line. As I mentioned, this is where we will turn from grid coordinate F63, where we are now, 1 coordinate over to the left to E63, and we'll resume the tour. And also you can see where more of the sub-assemblies for the suspension is installed on the left-hand side of this image. I also want to give you a view from outside the factory in the same general area. You can see B63 is the coordinate and what this looks like. Also the amount of materials on the 2nd and 3rd floors. I'm going to turn around here and show you an interesting and fun thing that Giga Texas has. They have this
thing was
small
the
cart that's
Easter
used
egg
for personnel to drive around Giga Texas, and they've made it into a CyberTruck. And I think this is pretty cool how they did that. It's even got a tailgate with that red LED bar. And take a look at the front here. It's got the LED CyberTruck front end as well. So pretty cool. And it's neat to see that they have this kind of fun here at Giga Texas. Now behind
you
this
need to do
wall,
a Dukes of Hazzard to get in, it looks like.
area, we see the final
yeah, it definitely looks like
street,
that.
final 1 street, also where they have the dolly loading and the receiving doors on the right-hand side. You can also get a good sense of how they have like a warehouse effect here. That's all of the items that are brought in that are needed for production, and that's where they are temporarily stored until they are needed. Good view of where that display was. And we can see we're at the corner of Cyber and Subframe Boulevard and Street, also West Subframe location here. Another good view of this elevator system that is installed to move bodies from one floor to the other with the inset grid map. You can see we are on E63 and where we are located currently within the factory.
That thing was freaking huge, by the way.
Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, as we continue to
crazy.
progress towards the north, we're going to see Cybertrucks in less developed stages because we're heading closer towards the start of the general assembly versus where we started towards the end. But this is a really good view next to this lift system on the left of where we are located. And what we're seeing is the beginning of the rear kit, that's RK, you see on the assembly line here. You can see the platforms. They're putting the brakes, the calipers, looks like the steering knuckles. All of this will be placed on this particular platform, and it will move for robotic assembly of the front and rear suspensions. And we're also at E62, and the inset map gives you a really good idea of where we are located.
Now, just point out for a second, you see all those platforms that are very specialized for being able to hold the parts together. They ain't cheap, okay? People will refer to them as like a pallet or a tray or something like that. Like, no, they're not just stamped out. They are very precisely engineered to make sure everything's in there. And when you build these lines, you want to calculate exactly the number of those that you need. You don't want to have too many of them, because then you're paying for something that's a pretty expensive item.
So I got an interesting comment just now from John Yent, who says that the computer in the car runs different software when it's on the assembly line to manage its own construction.
Yes, yes. There's a factory mode that it definitely works in. As far as I don't know all the details, because of course it's everyone's like, can't tell you, but there is definitely each piece basically kind of understands itself, and once it gets plugged in. So one of the first things they do with a new component, whether it's like one of these brake units or something like that, they plug it in this case with just the power over Ethernet. It powers up. It then communicates with the main system, which you notice is like in the vehicle, like from the get-go, basically. It's just there. And so then that thing pings it and it says, hey, you doing okay? All the pieces going well. It then goes through and it checks itself out, does diagnostics and everything. If anything goes wrong, it can then flag a human or a robot or whatever to come in and adjust it. But just, again, you're not waiting until the end of the assembly line to find out that it's not working properly.
So you don't wait until the end to find out the taillight malfunctioned.
Yeah.
It's notifying you right away.
Right.
That's great.
Yes. And then you send it to repair right there. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, right. Because you can just pull it right off.
Yeah. Basically rework. So you want to check these things and then pull it off the line and do the rework. And
I believe that more complex units like the motor itself are actually pre-tested on their own, right? So they would put it up to a bench and they would test it out before, because that's so complex. That's like something you obviously would want to test elsewhere.
And the seats are also pre-tested where they're being assembled before they even go on to the battery pack. They go through something there to make sure the entire mechanism is working. So again, you don't find out too late. And then the seat assembly line will have a bunch of rework stations if it fails something that then has to go get repaired and then comes right back on around.
Yeah. But it's very cool. I believe that one of the first, and again, this is just a guess from what I've heard, but I believe the 12-volt battery and the master control unit, all of that kind of stuff is one of the first things that comes online. And then as the car is built around it, it's constantly like going like, hey, you doing okay? Everything good? And it's like, yeah, I'm good. And so as it's going down, it's just building itself out, and it identifies itself. So they're building the digital twin, and they're like, I'm part number N6705 or something, right? So it's like identifying itself. So when the car gets out of there, if you go to Tesla service, they're like, oh, you've got part N6705 right here. We know exactly which part it was, what day it was made, like where the parts came from. It's pretty crazy that the amount of detailed knowledge.
So basically, I'm not sure if it's called factory mode or if it's called like C3PO mode, where it kind of knows how to assemble itself. And then I wonder if at some point it goes, you stupid Wookiee, be more careful. That's not how you connect it. You put my left arm on my right arm. Oh, move it around.
That'll be when it goes to the right-hand drive side. It'll be like, you put my steering wheel on the wrong side.
Well, and I think it's important here to talk about how different this is from the way that other manufacturers assemble stuff, especially with the electronic components. A lot of times the way that quality assurance is done is there will be a run. You'll do 100 parts or 100 assemblies or whatever it is, or 200 or 300 or 1,000 or 10,000, and then you'll randomly sample that, and then you'll do testing on your random samples to see that everything checks out, and then you'll say, okay, we think that everything in that batch is good, and then you'll just move on. And then this is one of the sources for a lot of big recalls, is they'll find out later, oh, our random sampling did not catch defects, and there were defects, and it affected maybe half of that batch. And when Tesla's doing this, if we believe Joe Justice, what they're doing is they're actually testing at least the electronic components. They're doing full testing on every single component as it moves through the line. So there's if there's one bad part in an entire batch, even that one will be caught at that time and will get rejected out.
Right. That was the big fad back in the 80s. That's all you heard was statistical quality controls. And everyone was just setting up and gearing up and learning all about that. And basically, I don't think I've heard that term since the 80s. And a lot of it comes down to is because you can start to do the measurement on the line. And now as you get more to this Internet of Things, there is absolutely no excuse on why everything can't be tested. So with the camera systems and stuff like that, I mean, at that point, it was the only way you could do it because you couldn't afford all these measurement systems. So you tried to come up with statistically, if I'm starting to see something is going wrong, it means something's out of spec somewhere on the line. Send some people down there to go ahead and start changing something. So, and then then preventive maintenance will do it. But it's a little bit late kind of at that point, because now you have all this work in progress that you're getting ready to throw out.
And when you've got digital twins of every car made, you could literally have a recall that affects one car.
Yeah. That's the cool part about it is they can be like, oh, these 3 cars that were made, 2 weeks apart are the only ones that are affected by this. So we can deal. Yeah. It's impressive. It also means that there's just way fewer recalls that are necessary, aside from just, software fixes and things like that, which is generally what happens with Tesla recalls.
Yeah. I mean, you start tying that into your tooling, you can validate that this particular nut got the appropriate torque setting on there, that you went in there and then went down there, you're ready to say, yes, that's what it was. That was the measurement value.
And that was one of the recalls they had. I think it was a Model S or something, was a torque setting on the steering column or something. But they knew that because it was like, oh, we see back here that these particular model numbers, the torque,
weren't done right. Something was wrong with the settings.
But they could tell exactly which ones it was. It wasn't just a guess. It's pretty crazy how impressive that is.
As we talked at the very beginning of the video, we're only seeing a small fraction of Giga Texas. So for several more grid coordinates off to the right into that dark area, Giga Texas is continuing to expand and grow its production capability, which is pretty amazing to think about. Now, as you can tell here with the column, we are on E61. And with the inset map, this gives you a pretty good idea of where we are located. Again, we're continuing to move towards the north through General Assembly and going in opposite direction of how it operates. And I also thought I would show you where we are on the outside of the building. You can see the arrow. This is E61, so we're on the same grid line from the north-south. And this gives you a really good view of more of the activity that is going on here on the 3rd floor for CyberTruck and what's going on the 2nd floor as well. And take a look at this. This is some of those vehicle carrying items. They move the vehicles around. They have to do this right now because they don't have all the wheels or the suspension on. And this really helps move production line along without having to have people moving the vehicles. This also is, again, an image showing you the grid coordinate where we're located. We are at E60. And in the background, you can actually see some of the open receiving doors with some of the sunlight coming in. And again, that helps give us a cross-reference of where we would see on the outside of the building during the drone flights.
So Scott, is this a conveyance mechanism versus something where they're actually going to be doing manufacturing? So this is just to get the vehicle from one point to another. They're not actually going to do any assembly work while it's on this.
Oh, they could. They could. So part of it might be to move it around, and the other could be to move it from one station to another. So it's a type of overhead conveyor that they have. They just suspend it on it.
While we're here, this is what I was talking about. Notice how this car is entirely black on the inside. So that's why I was like, these ones looked very different than the ones that were further down the line. So I just, again, don't know if they're iterating and playing around and they're like, yeah, let's just, powder coat the whole thing, or I don't know, whatever it is, they're clearly different than the ones that were later down the line.
Give us a cross-reference of where we would see on the outside of the building during the drone flights.
How you guys doing? Good. How are you? Doing great. Going for the altitude here.
You can also see quite a few of those car carriers along this kind of a ceiling-mounted movable system, and you can get a really good sense of how this structure and the machinery works to maneuver the bodies. As I mentioned, in the distance, you can see some of the sunlight. That's where those open receiving doors are on the west side of the factory. And we are still just a little bit south of the main entrance portion of the factory as well. And that's where the tours began and where all of the invitees came through. And we've also seen a lot of how that main entrance looks as it's been developing. So here's a good close-in view of some of the machinery that is used here on the section. We also get a sense to see that there's some robots in action. We'll see that shortly. But I wanted to just give you another view here of how
So just kind of pause for a second, and we can see the contrast between the two lines. Is that, that conveyor line is that when the conveyor wants to advance, they all have to advance together. The other line with the overhead conveyor is usually what's called a power and free. So they're not necessarily coupled together. So if you need a little bit more time with one of them, you can do it without slowing the whole line down. So all the ones in front of you can go. Of course, you're getting a little bit in the way of the cars coming behind you that you might have to catch up. But this way, there's a little bit of a decoupling on that. You don't have to worry about the whole line slowing down because some operation suddenly had a glitch that you had to fix. But in this case, yeah, you can see that that whole conveyor has to move together.
To these movable platforms. And this all takes place outside of the vehicle body, so it's a lot more efficient. You don't have to work around the body and the castings of the vehicle. All of this is done outside. And again, if you look in the back, you see where there's a lot more of the workstations, a lot more production capacity that is either being in the final stages of being assembled or continuing to be built out here.
So Scott, if we stop here for just a second, sorry, thanks, Hans. So he was mentioning the fact that these are being put together. If you went to a GM factory and I don't know, ICE vehicle, whatever, would they be putting the engine into the vehicle and assembling all these pieces of it in the body of the vehicle, or would they be doing it in a similar way?
No, they'd be doing the body in white because that engine has to come after it's been painted.
Right. Okay.
So they would
but when they do it, do they put the
final
whole
assembly is
engine
when everything comes in.
Yeah, but do they put the whole thing in?
Yeah. Usually have like an engine assembly with the axle and everything in there, and then they kind of bring it up from underneath.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I remember.
And the difference here is that because you're not worried about the painting process, you can drop the engine in from the top if you want. So they're coming in from whatever angle that they want to. Right. But a lot of it is very similar. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it. So you'll see right there, there's what looks like a rack that's basically a gravity feed conveyor system that they're probably just bringing in some consumables. I think you can see there's like one box on there that might be, something that they maybe just nuts or washers or something else. The ones behind there, you can see a lot. And so there will be a trolley that's going around doing what they call the milk run and coming up to these stations and just taking the boxes off and dropping a lot of them on there just to make sure there's always an ample supply. And so it looks like, so what they have there is they have two that are facing downwards. So they either want to have an ample supply, whatever that is, or there's two types of components going in there. And they have one that's kind of going the opposite direction. That's where the empties go. So when you're all done, you take whatever that tote is, put it up there, drop it in there. And when the milk run comes along, of course, the milkman is always delivering you a full cart and taking away your empty carts, right? So that's pretty much how that's set up.
And then as far as sub-assemblies, it looks like what we have here for the CyberTruck is there's a front powertrain and suspension, a rear powertrain and suspension. Those are kind of their own sub-assemblies. Then we have the body of white, or the body in white. And then there's the structural floor pan and all of the interior seats and stuff that are put on top of that. And so it's I guess a step toward having that structural floor pan, I think, is definitely a good way to begin an unbox process, since you're not having to bring in all those seats and stuff from above later on. But it's definitely not all the way to where we don't see these things being mated to the actual front casting or the actual rear casting, like they're assembled separately from those castings and then attached later.
And I was just thinking about that. Is a milk run a type of skeuomorphism? How many people actually understand that analogy these days?
That's interesting. Very, very few probably. And also, of course, well, then there's the added historical aspect.
You just call it's a prime delivery. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there you go. But I was also thinking it's got the World War II or sort of aspect of it, the milk run being the easy assignment. So
the milk run, but no, we think of like the milkman used to deliver milk around town, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's
but it's
basically
like
what
layers,
they're doing, and that's
layers of
what
meaning. Yeah,
that's what they actually refer to it as. But okay, because it wasn't lost on any of you. I assume you knew what it meant.
Yeah,
we're old enough.
Yeah, we're
except
all
for Hans. I don't know how he understood it.
Hey, I read.
Okay,
there we go.
Actually, no, I have had milk delivered before. So yeah, one of the places that we lived, we got fresh milk on the daily, and it was in the glass bottles and everything. It was great.
That's awesome. Yeah. Not
Man,
even
back in-
homogenized, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
in the
that's
house,
the best.
in the house I grew up in, we actually had a milk door that was built into the house. It was built in 1921, and so it actually ended up somebody broke into our house using that because they just reached in, grabbed the thing, unlocked the door, and just walked in and broke into our house. I was like, "Whoops!" After that, we boarded it up, but it was pretty cool before that. So anyway,
Yeah, I had a friend that just bought a house down in Detroit, and they've been fixing it up, and they had that out there. It was like probably built in around the turn of the century, a little bit after, and it was like this quaint thing. And they wanted to know what this other thing was. Like, well, that's where they delivered the coal, and that's where they delivered the milk.
Right, exactly. Yep. So
Turn
there we
back
go. Extra
towards the
bonus for
west
everyone.
here. I'll give you a good view of some interesting things. This is the front fenders, and what I really want to show you here is not only the coordinate system of where we are located, but also I want to go into some detail how these are made and how they are attached to the vehicle. Now I'm going to use this crash test demonstrator that was out at front of the main entrance for the event. Take a look at the panels on the left and the right. You can see how they have that inner stamped structure that is adhesively bonded to the stainless steel. And then this is what is attached to the castings using bolts. And those are pretty obvious within this particular image that you are seeing. And then with this image, this goes back to the rack on the assembly line and gives you a good idea again of how these look and how they are arranged for installation onto the truck. And this is all done by robotic assemblers. And I think that's pretty cool to see how this is done. I was wondering how the stainless steel skin was actually affixed to the body. And this tells us quite a bit of how that is done.
Well, that's interesting to find out that those are not laser welded, at least for those front fender parts, that it's just the structural adhesive.
Yeah.
Now we actually get to the
Maneuver
robot.
around here, give you a good view of how those fenders are being attached. You can also see that the trunk lid has already been attached by this point. But a good view, you can see the fender, you can see the robots, and they just pick them up and they will assemble them right onto the vehicle. And they have the fenders, the left and the right, on either side. So it's a pretty quick pickup, install, bolt them on, and the fenders are completed. So
It
cool.
was hard to see there, but one of them was the robot that was doing the material handling, taking it out of there somehow. Actually, I think something happens that goes down on another conveyor that gets it into the location for the robot to pick it up. It puts it over, and then another robot comes in and does the actual attachment process. But that was in like a demo mode, and it kept on going back and forth and not actually doing it. Now, the interesting thing, when I saw that, I was rather surprised to see that, because we keep talking about how robots have been taking jobs away from people. If you look at what's going on, it looks like those robots are actually taking a job away from Optimus, because that was something I thought Optimus would do, something like that. So they're already automating some of those things that maybe you would typically see could be done with normal human labor, but has already been automated with standard industrial robots.
Different view. You also get a good sense of how the stainless steel is folded and shaped to make these front fenders. And of course, you can see that underlying stamped section that is bonded to it. Now, this is a great opportunity here to get in close and watch some of the robots in action. So I'm going to come in here towards the fence section and give you a good view of some of the activity that is underway here within this section. And again, I want just to point out that all of this is being done robotically. You don't see any humans doing any of these body panel assembly. And I think that's just amazing to see how all of this is done and the level of automation that Tesla has brought to the Cybertruck. And I think that bodes very well for the production capacity, the production rate, and also the ramping that we can see with the production coming up in the coming months. I think all of this is just a really great sign. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see more of those rear suspensions almost completed now at this point in the line. And then they will be moved over to the opposite side where they are assembled onto the vehicle. And usually that's called a marriage, where they take underbody sections and the structural pack, and they will marry it onto the body in white. Here's a good view of the rear fender being installed. Again, note all of this is being done by robotic assemblers.
And note, that's why I call it the robot zoo.
Fences and all.
There, even though it was in dry mode and it wasn't doing anything, you could set, there was a second robot that was coming in that would normally be doing something. I assume adding either bolts or doing some sort of like rivets or whatever it was. It was hard to tell, but anyway, that would be how it would affix it to it. In addition to probably some adhesive there too as well. So.
On this side of the line is a good view of the pretty much completed rear suspension. You can actually see some of the orange high tension cables for the drive unit, the main battery, and that's been assembled onto that unit already. And also just gives you an idea of just the modular construction that they use and just how much is installed onto all of these subframes before they even get close to the vehicle itself. Robots working here. This particular one is where it applies the rubber adhesive to the windows. And this is a good view of where we are located within the factory using the inset grid map.
This was the spot.
And you can see we are on grid.
If you stop here, this was the part that I was talking about with Scott. Look how early this is. We're almost at the, at the entrance here. So we're almost at the beginning of the factory. They're putting this on now so that it can cure the whole rest of the way as it's going down, to final assembly. So yeah, very cool.
Coordinate E55 where this robot is located. So let's watch it in operation. They're not actually applying the adhesive right now because it's for demonstration for the CyberTruck delivery event, but it is really cool to see how the robots do this, and then they will position the glass, install it directly onto the vehicle.
Tell me about the spinning, Scott.
It's because there's probably a preferred direction for the nozzle where it dispenses it. So normally you'd think you wouldn't have to spin it if you didn't have it, but probably the tip has a shape to it to make sure the dispensing is done in a particular direction. And they spin it that way because usually the robot can't do that spinning that quickly for you, especially when you have that end of arm tooling. If you attempted to do something like that, it's just too bulky. So they've actually added an additional axis to the robot. So technically it's like a 7-axis arm right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard
it seems
to
like
see,
redundancy, but
when
it's
they brought
needed
the tip down right there, they actually had a 45-degree or like a 90-degree cut in. So I think the direction of travel is where the longest edges of the nozzle are, that they're parallel to the direction of travel. And then it's got that nice little cutout.
Right. So it's got a dispensing tip that it has to follow the direction of travel. And when you get in that corner, you've got to change direction really quickly. And you just can't do it with the robot. The robot's going to be swinging around doing everything else. So that's sort of the only way to be able to do a quick 90 and make sure it's pointed the right way. So that means that tooling has to be integrated in pretty well with the robotic program to understand that.
One of the interesting things for the production of the CyberTruck is how early in the process the glass is installed. You can see that the entire front windshield and the roof glass is installed. They're getting ready to put that triangular front piece in as well. And that's pretty much all of the glass. They have that rear window into the bed, and it's already in as well. And
yeah, and so it makes sense that they do those larger pieces first to give them more cure time, and then the smaller pieces of glass after that.
That's just pretty cool. And here's a good close-in view of that assembled rear suspension. And this is what it would look like just before they are ready to install it onto the body.
One thing that is very noticeable to me is there's still quite a bit of open space that could be developed. And I know that you're working on a bunch of other stuff, but very, very cool to see. There is, but
you can also see the FS1. We are now in the area where the front suspension is being put together. And as we continue further to the north, you'll be able to see the front suspension sub-assemblies being put together. And I'll show you that here shortly. I want to give you the view of this car carrier and also the location of where we are located in the factory, once again, using this grid coordinate map on the upper right. With these views, we can definitely tell that we're earlier on in the production process of the CyberTruck. None of the exterior body panels have been installed, but you can tell that the structural pack interior has already been installed at this point, plus the roof and the front window. Structural pack interior.
And actually, if you look at that, I think you can see the rear seats are in there already too. So they put those in very early as well.
Yeah, and the front windshield. So it's just an interesting observation right
And
now.
and again,
how
look,
the
that
process
entire
to
thing was
build
black.
equipment
There was like
goes.
none of that bronze color stuff
The
at
bulk
all.
of it
So,
is that front and rear
It
casting.
looked like a
the
Model X
middle
for a second
and
there. I didn't
passenger
recognize
shelf.
it as a
Once that's all
Cybertruck.
together, then the installation is essentially putting a large number of subassemblies directly in. The structural pack with the interior is a subassembly. We see the front suspension subassembly on the right here, and that's just installed directly as well. This is a good still shot showing you again the coordinates where we are located, and we are in E53, and this is where the front hood is installed. And they were kind enough to have a demo unit here. We'll take a look at it, but here you can tell that the underlying stamped structure is bonded to the stainless steel. You can see that through the openings. Then they put trim pieces around, and then this is how the robots pick it up and maneuver it for installation into the vehicle. Again, this is pretty early in the process because they haven't.
I'm not sure if that part's robotic yet.
Here's a good
It almost
close-in
looks
view
like it's
this, display showing you what
a lift
the
carry.
front.
So that might actually be, so there's a lift assist because it's too heavy for any, but I didn't see the robots that would actually be doing everything else.
Trunk, the light assembly, and some of the trim pieces look like. The stainless steel on here is two separate pieces, one for the top, one for the front, and then they're bonded to that substructure. And a good view here of how the Cybertruck is looking. Again, it's interesting that the interior is put in while it's just the castings and that main shell for the passengers and before any of the body panels. It's very efficient. Now, this is, again, the front suspension one line. You can see how it's being.
And again, positive, that's probably a manual assembly line over there as well, because you see all the lift assists along there, but you don't see any robot arms.
Yeah,
so all those things that are, those red cables that are coming down, those are basically there to help you lift up the heavy parts and bring them over and drop them in.
Yeah, I believe that, especially because there was no cages in that area, it looked like that entire
right. There's no cages. It's open. It's not running. There's no people there for to see it, but there's no robots either. Right. It doesn't mean it won't be automated in the future, but right now that's the easiest way for them to be able to do the assembly. And again,
you know, that's a place where Optimus can go. Like
potentially, potentially would be Optimus doing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
How it's being put together on those sub-assembly sections, and then those are moved along that line and they finish that assembly. Here's another good view of some of those car carriers. Again, we're earlier in the production of the Cybertruck, so they are less developed, but at this point you can definitely tell that the front and rear suspension sub-assemblies have been installed at this point. And for the assemblies that are on the right-hand side of the line here, and then the bodies on the left-hand side that we see here under this movable roof-mounted system, that means that they need to cross over. So there are several points along the line where the items from one side cross over to the left. And we've seen that in several different sections along this tour so far. But I think this is a really good view of how this work is progressing. And again, the level of automation is just
so it looks like from here to Joe's right, the front suspension assembly is actually progressing the further back towards the entrance that we go, and then it crosses over back there towards the back and then gets mated to the body in white assembly, and then the body in white is actually progressing kind of in the opposite direction.
Yes, yes.
Kind of like
that's what we surmise. Yeah. So it went down one direction, turned around, and comes back on up, and then goes up a lift, and then may have a parallel line above it, and then it comes back down.
Complex is the Cybertruck. Now I know that people have talked about how complex the Cybertruck is to make. I think what they're really referring to is making all of this production system to be able to make the Cybertruck, and that is what is very difficult. Now, here's a good inset view of the front suspension line. You can see we are on E50, and this is where we are located in the factory. We can also tell that we've moved far to the north now along the production line. A quick shot here of the column, you can see E50, and that just confirms where we are in the factory. And as we continue to maneuver this direction, we can see that the front suspension sub-assemblies are getting more and more developed as we go along this line. You can also see some of the brakes and calipers and the steering knuckles that have been pre-assembled already. Now here's another one of these very large vehicle lifts. Again, these are used to move the bodies from the upper floors down to the ground floor. And with this inset image, you can see we are on E48. Also on the left-hand side of the screen, you see that white wall. That's the rear of the main entrance for Giga, Texas. So I think that's pretty cool to see just how close the production lines are right behind a drive path and then the wall for the main entrance. There's a good video showing you how this lift system works, and moving up higher up to the next floor. There's also a good view right now. All the suspension subassemblies and the structural package have been assembled into the vehicle at this point in the production process. So pretty cool to be able to see that and see underneath the Cybertruck during the production process. We're getting closer to the point where the tour comes to an end, but you'll be able to see the portion of the assembly where the windshields are installed and the roof glass panels on the Cybertrucks directly ahead of where we see those robots working. You can see some of those Cybertruck bodies and also one of the very large glass window panels right here. What you'll see here with this inset map is where we are located for the Model Y end of line. And this E46 line, and the map gives you an idea of where we're located. You can see those lit structures. That's the end of line final checkout for the Model Ys. And interestingly enough, on the outside of the building,
way, just
we
to
can
stop on
see
that,
this.
That was they were cranking out Model Ys while we were there. So it was really weird because the Cybertruck line, it was just bizarre, like how close together, even in this giant factory, they're like right up, they're butted up right against each other. And so, you know, as we were walking out, they were just like Model Y, Model Y, Model Y just coming out of there. So like little Pez dispensers spitting them out. So yeah, pretty crazy.
Section, you can see those two ramps. You can see where the arrow is pointing. That's where the Alpha 45 or A45 grid line is. And just on the inside is where we saw the Model Ys being prepared for movement.
Just pause for 1 second
so
there.
This brings...
you see all those trucks. Only one of them is kind of parked there, and the others, the trailers, are just sitting there. And that there is no like shipping and receiving docks at one location in the building. It's around the whole thing. And that's because that is the warehousing. The idea is that why bring up a truck, unload it, you have to find space for it to put it off somewhere and then go retrieve it later. Their idea is like, wait a minute, when we take it off the truck, we want it to go straight to the production line. We don't want any additional steps. And so that's why you see they're sitting there without the actual tractor in front of it, because they are part of the warehousing. And that's, again, something that Henry Ford did at Highland that seemed to have disappeared, that Elon liked a lot. And that's why you have it going all the way around the belt. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense to do that.
So a question on that, Scott, if are these trailers, are they filled with, so along the production process, we saw a rack and it would have a row of parts in there. And that rack is specifically designed to easily feed those parts one by one into the production process. Are the racks in the truck, or is the truck just full of parts, and then those parts have to
the truck is probably
be...
just full of parts or boxes or something like that, whatever it is that you've ordered that's coming from the sub-supplier. And then it sits there. And the idea is that those are actually parked very close to where they're needed in production. Because your normal kind of loading, unloading docks will be on one side of the building, but where the material is needed is like somewhere else, which means you got to get down there, get that stuff out of shipping and receiving, and then pull that out and then get it over to where you want. But right now, what they're saying is that, no, let's park these things really close to where they're needed and minimize the amount of travel. And oh, by the way, we are not going to have any sort of internal warehousing. Get rid of it as much as possible. Now, there are some situations where you have no choice. Like they've got to pile up like a lot of the stampings and stuff like that, because it's really hard to get those in kind of a just-in-time method, especially if they're building them locally. So yeah, those are going to stack up. But a lot of the other things that are coming from their sub-suppliers, it's more or less, you know, we have this particular delivery schedule. It's going to come here, and that tractor is going to stay there for, I don't know, maybe a day or two before it's needed. But it's easier to sort of rent that as opposed to having to build out more warehousing. And it gives you incredible flexibility. And again, it just makes the logistics so much easier, because you don't have all these fork trucks crossing each other and getting in the way. And like, how do we do this? Traffic management, just put it where it belongs.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Brian.
Yeah, and
You're
so
muted.
then...
And they have hundreds of trailers on the west side of the highway, a warehouse on wheels over there, and more on the east side to the east of the factory. And the idea is that you could have 3, 4, 10 trucks full of blinkers, and when you need them, you just swap out the trailer and you're done.
To a close the tour that we were able to see with the general assembly line of Cybertruck, and a little bit of a bonus here of the end of line for the Model Ys, and what this looks like from the inside, and what you can see with the drone on the outside. So there you have it. A great event.
So yeah, again, and Scott, when we did the tour back in May, and I guess Brian too, like that, we came in, we went up and kind of like looked above at the final assembly of the Model Y. So we were like right at that corner at that time.
Right,
So, yeah.
exactly. Yep. Yeah. So I got an
no
idea.
Pictures, no pictures.
I know, no pictures back then. We weren't allowed to do pictures, but yeah. So
yeah, but they were up here. They're all up here. Now speaking of pictures, I did take one picture at when the Cybertruck was in Tampa. And when I was looking at it, I was trying to think of how is that affixed to the vehicle? And I was trying to imagine if there was any welding. And I don't know if my eyes were tricking me. I see what maybe is a very thin line, and I'll try to show it right now, and you can probably debunk me on this. And I'll go ahead and do a share here, and go ahead and present, and I'll show the screen. And we're going to show this window here. Okay, does everyone see this right now?
Yes.
Now, as I come in here, do you see right along here where my mouse is going? Do you see a faint line?
Oh, yeah, I sure do.
And I was like, And it seems to go fairly, it might even go a little bit further up. And
Okay,
it's
I can
really
tell you-
parallel to that.
I can tell you my theory on it from having worked with metal fabrication is that might be where the break ends on the machine that folds it. So it could be that is where the die that creates the fold has ended, and that there's a little residual visible mark there. And that if that's the case, it would be something I imagine they would work out within a month or 10 if they haven't already.
Right, because you can see it go all the way to this edge here, right along. And that's why I was thinking, what is that? Am I imagining things? Is it really there? Is it something to do with the lighting? Could it potentially be where they were laser welding something on there and you're just seeing a little bit coming through? But yeah, that almost makes sense as well, is that sometimes you got to hold onto the part as well to have these other operations. And there's going to be a little bit of scoring as a result.
It's bonded to an inner panel via epoxy, so I don't think it would be, that part would be laser welded. So yeah, I don't, that's my guess.
Okay. So good. So we're back.
well,
Thank you. So I wasn't imagining things.
Yeah, but they specifically talked like Lars talked about the air bending and how they needed to do that, because otherwise they get the orange peel effect. And so, if it's not working perfectly, I could still see some contact.
But that's I think that's down at probably where the actual bend is being done. But then you have somewhere
no, because
else
you have
where
to have something that's
hold
holding
place.
it while it's being
Yeah,
bent,
and that's
it's
probably
those
what we're seeing
outside
there.
points that,
You need something to hold it on there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
And so either it's causing a little bit of deformation there, or it's just leaving marks.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it
well,
did
and
seem too
could even
perfectly
be-
straight.
It could be a calibration issue on the air bending process too. That's probably exactly why, as the reason that they're using air in the bending process is to prevent any of those marks on the actual stainless steel. And
Right.
so it may be that they didn't have sufficient pressure to create that air cushion as they were doing that bending process on that.
Yeah, but that's a good find. Good eye there, because it's pretty subtle. But yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you're scratching your head trying to figure out what's going on there. Because it's like, I know it's not riveted on there. I don't see any rivets, but I mean, in some ways, it would be really cool if they did rivet it, because it would kind of go with the whole idea, the cyberpunk idea of putting them in there and you actually embrace
That would kill the
fact that it's there.
Coefficient the drag coefficient would be killed. Yeah,
And of course, we notice
Just
that they
get-
do that on aircraft. You have all sorts of rivets on aircraft,
right.
and they're trying to
You
get
can
rid
just
of it for
do
that
with
reason.
stickers. Yeah,
Yeah.
just use stickers.
Oh yeah, you can put stickers on there, or
Just like the
that's
shattered
what we-
window thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
The shattered
That's what the-
window is a factory accessory now.
I know you can
I'm
buy
a factory
it.
accessory, huh?
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, you can get
There
like
we
a
go.
sticker. I think it's only for Cybertruck, but I want to get one for my Model Y. I think that'd be awesome.
Mhm.
Just a big shattered window
Yeah.
for the back.
Why
window or
not?
something.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Hans, it was great that you brought the band back together again.
Yeah.
The one thing I have to point out is the next time you do this, you've got to get one more person, because if we have 5, we can officially call it a bunch of know-it-alls.
Really, in a bunch is 5. 5 or more.
A
huh?
bunch is 5 or more. Yeah.
Scott's got to be pedantic about it. We've got to make sure we have the
No,
correct
I have to
number.
be a know-it-all.
We have 1, we have a
Ah.
pair,
Mm.
a trio, quartet.
We're going to
and
get
then
James in there to be
quartet.
perfect.
a string quartet. Yes, we are a string quartet
Yes.
of know-it-alls.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
But we want to be a quintet, right?
There we go. Cool. Well, thank you guys.
Well,
This
any
was- this
parting
was
thoughts as
awesome.
we wrap up?
I'm just so excited about this whole gosh darn thing. It's been 4 years in the making and we're finally here. Could we open up deliveries? I don't know what
Yes.
the wait is,
Yes.
but it's very exciting.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Mine too. I can't
Yeah,
wait.
and-
I can't wait to test drive one. That's my thought too. I'm hoping that the test drives will open up locally, around the country too. So that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I was glad to see there was a wade mode actually in there that was
Yeah,
pointed out, which,
yeah.
but I don't know if it's because it's for fording a river as opposed to actually boating a little bit. So I mean,
It definitely
wading-
said wade, not
wade
not
versus
swim.
swimming.
Yeah.
And if I remember,
Yeah.
wading means your ankles are planted on the bottom of whatever it is you're walking around on, and you're not swimming.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's really meant that when you're going through a deep body of water, it's interesting, the idea that you can pressurize the battery pack when going into wade mode. And now, is there any venting at all in the battery packs, Brian, or are they completely sealed up?
Oh, on a normal battery, they're sealed, but they are, but they fail out, as it were. So
Right. Yeah.
if you were to submerge it, it wouldn't fail inward, but outward. And the other neat thing they do is typically on the 3Y, the bottom is aluminum and the top is steel, so that if there is a fire, the batteries will drop out
Yes,
before
yes.
they burn through.
Right.
Okay. So it is pretty much sealed. So if you're going to pressurize it, there's 2 ways to pressurize it. They actually have a hose that's attached to whatever is the pressure source, but that seems a bit silly. The other is you just use Boyle's law, and that is you heat the thing up. You precondition the battery. So it might mean they're really preconditioning the battery.
Yeah.
But maybe they precondition it a little bit more than you do for supercharging.
Maybe.
I guess it would
Battery
depend
too.
on how much extra pressure that they have to build up,
Right.
because there's kind of a limit on, although there's not a whole lot of gas in there, so it probably wouldn't take too much heating to actually
Right.
get a significant increase in
mean,
pressure.
Right.
But
right.
if you needed more,
Yeah.
But maybe it's, again, if they have those, what are kind of check valves, it may be that there's a concern that, yeah, they're designed to go in one direction, but up to a point. And it may be that they want to have a little bit more pressure to really keep them locked in place when you're getting the pressure from the outside. Who knows? That's just speculation on why.
Yeah.
But I would think all you have to do is heat the battery pack up to whatever the level is. And then it seems like as soon as it hits the water, it's going to cool down. So you're going to have to keep that thing running in order to make sure that it maintains the temperature.
Well,
for whatever
and the other
pressure
thing is
needed.
that I'm thinking about the way you would normally wade mode something that might not work because, usually you're off-roading, you come up to a river, you're like, oh, I'm going to have to go through it. And so you hit wade mode and then you go through the river. So it's not like it's like wade mode. Please wait 10 minutes while it heats up.
Right.
I doubt that's
Mhm.
so it probably, I'm just trying to think because I thought the battery packs were just completely full of whatever that fluid lubricant was that they're using to cool it off. So I'm wondering again, like what you were saying, how much gas is actually in there? There may not
Well,
be
there
that
is
much.
the epoxy or whatever they put in there. Maybe that heats up a little bit and that expands a little bit.
Yeah.
So the cooling is only in the channels. It's not like loose around the batteries.
Okay.
And one thing that may be deeply disappointing to all of us and the viewers is that it became clear when Sandy interviewed Elon that he is under NDA, that there is an NDA in place,
Yes.
which means we're unlikely to see a full teardown of the Cybertruck. And it certainly means he won't be tearing it down for the competition. He will, I am certain, not have reports available.
Okay, so you think the NDA excludes someone from saying, "Hey, Sandy, here's a Cybertruck, tear it down," because now everything he learns about the Cybertruck, he's learned outside. It's basically what is it? It's no longer from the fruit from the forbidden tree, right? So he could do that as a workaround on the NDA.
I don't think he would, though. I assume
Okay,
that
they were
this is
smart.
included.
They were smart. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Okay, Sandy's kind of like an enemy. Pull them in.
Worth mentioning.
Yep.
Worth mentioning. Every manufacturer has their own teardown department, and
Mhm.
there are many companies that do exactly what Monroe and Associates does. I've
Right.
met with a number of them at the Battery Show of North America. I met quite a few,
Mhm.
and not one of them was interested in going on camera. They're like, no, we're business to business, and
Yeah.
we sell for big bucks. And
Right.
so Sandy is very special to us, but what he does in his line of work is not, revolutionary or groundbreaking. He's
Yeah.
just very good at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And has
But he
given us
has
a peek
said
behind
that-
the curtain. Yeah.
He has said that they're going to get two, so one for him and one for the company. So the question is whether the one for the company they will tear down and share with us. I mean, I know that he got exclusive access to see a lot of the things at the factory, and I'm hoping that we actually get to see those videos come out. But so far, they've been pretty mum's the word. And
Right.
so, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what is and is not covered under that NDA and
Right.
what we get.
But if you
see from
remember
the
at the
outside.
after party, Sandy was running around extolling anyone with an early reservation number that he would buy it off of them. So they may have one, but it's probably still way down there. And it's a question of like whether the first one is a teardown or the first one is the one Sandy gets to have, and then they have to wait for the next one. So
Right.
He sounded like he was impatient and he wanted his first, and then they'll
he
do
wanted it
tear
right
down one
away.
later.
But yeah.
I think I'd go that way
Well, this is
myself.
great.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you for putting this together. I have to run off to a doctor's appointment because of cough and stuff. But anyway, because Texas loves me so much, they wanted to come home with me. So there we go. But anyway,
Come on,
so,
John. What happens in Texas is supposed to stay in Texas.
Yeah.
You're my favorite vector, John.
Thanks. I'm everyone's favorite disease vector. Thank you. It's not COVID, thank goodness. I tested myself on Monday, and I was
But
like,
the last time it was.
But yeah, the last time it was. So yeah, like I said, Texas loves me, wants to come home. So all right, cool. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. It was great getting together and chatting about geeky stuff. Hopefully the audience loved it. Yep.
Really
Thank you,
enjoyed it.
everybody.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. And with that, we'll sign off. Have a great
Take
day,
care,
everyone.
everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.